I'd like to welcome Dr. Daniel Salomon. He is with the Scripps Research Institute and the president of American Society of Transplantation. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Glad to be here.
This is only the second joint meeting of the WTC, so tell us what you're most looking forward to this year.
Well, for the year at the meeting, we would look forward to just the presentation of the best science, and that science should be basic, it should be clinical, and it should be translational, that bridge between basic and clinical.
So you're just wrapping up your term. You had two major goals, so let's talk about the first one, enhancing interactions between basic scientists and clinicians. So if we can talk about that.
Yeah, so a major issue over the last, maybe 10 years now have been changes on both science and clinical practice that has driven a wedge between basic scientists and clinicians. And I'm really concerned about the fact that that wedge keeps getting larger instead of smaller. And I feel like that's a direct threat to the future of transplantation. So in brief, on the clinical side, it's work. I mean, taking care of patients, being more efficient, worrying about billings, worrying about new electronic medical records. I mean, clinicians are busier practicing the same amount of medicine and then with layers and layers of other things on top of it, and it's really very difficult for them to say, okay, now I'm stopping and I'm going to think about basic research and science and read a completely different literature. They almost can't do it anymore. So clinicians are moving away from understanding and thinking about themselves as physician scientists. We used to define ourselves, particularly in transplantation, as physician scientists. Not so much anymore.
So how do you bridge that?
Well, on the basic research side, the pressures are very different, but they are under NIH funding issues. It's getting very difficult. We've had a flat NIH funding budget for a decade, and that's beginning to set the stage for what are the solutions here. So for the research scientists, they're going, you know, I just got to get my next grant. I have to have the most cutting edge science. I don't have a whole lot of time to figure out what the clinicians are worrying about at the bedside. I just have to stay focused on my research. So that gap, right? So solutions create opportunities to bring them back together again, because the future of medicine has always been doing good science, translating it to the bedside. So even though these gaps are happening, and even though we can understand the nature of the gaps and why they're happening, they're not acceptable. And so we've created a meeting called CEOT, Cutting Edge in Organ Transplantation, which is meant to bring the basic science and the clinicians together and talk about the major challenges in science. We've created a Transplant Immunology Research Network, which is to create new ways of dealing together, moving funds to the research scientists to take the pressure off of them, and making new opportunities for the busy clinicians to do research again. So those are the kinds of solutions we have.
And does that also take it one step further to Capitol Hill?
Well, our advocacy for improvement in NIH funding has been tireless for a decade. Unfortunately, it's just a very difficult situation right now. Our country has lots of priorities.
So we're talking about funding, and again, what's another big challenge? You were talking about reaching out with the public.
Yes. So if we look at the reality, then we have a flat NIH budget for the last 10 years. We have a neutral, zero-sum game in Washington when it comes to fiscal policy. The idea that we keep going back to Congress and that's our big solution, they're going to suddenly reach into their pocket and double the NIH budget again, has happened in the 2000s. Not going to happen, I think. Not in the near future. So what do? Well, there's a whole lot of people out there. There are 250,000 Americans right this minute with a functioning organ transplant. They're our stakeholders. If you figure the 250,000 at least have a couple family members, you could be up to 1 million people right now with absolutely direct stakes in transplantation. Let's reach out to them. Let's have a communication with them. Transplantation is a huge cost. End-stage renal disease is a huge cost on our government. Every American has a stake in transplantation success. Let's get that message out to the American public.
It's a good message. All right, Dr. Salomon, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.